My name is Imani Cole. I am 32 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was a senior machine learning engineer at a software company in Austin, Texas. My annual performance review was on a Thursday afternoon in April. It was scheduled for 45 minutes. My manager, Mr. Dade, had asked his assistant to block a full hour just in case, which I had noted when the invite arrived and which told me the conversation was not going to be straightforward. 22 minutes in, he said, "I want to be honest with you, Imani. The firm has more access to talent at your level than it had 3 years ago. The ML market has shifted. What you do here, I want to be direct, is something we could source competitively." He said it carefully, the way people say difficult things when they have rehearsed the careful version. I looked at him for a moment. Then I nodded. He took that as understanding, which was reasonable because it looked like understanding. My phone was face up on the table between us. I had placed it there when I sat down because I was expecting a call. I had not told Mr. Dade I was expecting a call. I had not told anyone at this firm that I was expecting a call. My phone buzzed. The name on the screen was Ms. Holt, the head of talent acquisition at Vertex Systems, one of the most respected AI infrastructure companies in the country. I looked at Mr. Dade. "Excuse me one moment," I said. "I need to take this." I picked up the phone, and the next 7 minutes rearranged the next several years of my life. I had been at the firm 3 years. I came in as a mid-level ML engineer at 29, recruited from a smaller startup where I had spent 2 years building recommendation systems on a team of 4 with minimal infrastructure and a budget that made creativity a survival skill. The firm had a larger team, better tooling, and problems that were actually hard in the ways that interested me, not just complex but genuinely unsolved. In my first year, I rebuilt the core data pipeline that fed our primary prediction model. It had been running on architecture designed 4 years earlier by people who had since left, and it was slow, brittle, and expensive to maintain. The rebuild took 9 months. It reduced inference latency by 61% and cut the infrastructure cost by roughly $400,000 annually. Nobody outside the engineering team knew I had done it. It was infrastructure work, invisible by definition until something breaks. In my second year, I built the anomaly detection system that became the foundation for our enterprise tier product. The product team had been asking for anomaly detection capability for 18 months before I joined. I shipped a working version in 11 weeks. In my third year, I was asked to lead the ML components of a major platform initiative called Orion. It was the largest engineering project the firm had undertaken in 5 years. 18 months of work. A cross-functional team of 14. Mr. Dade was the executive sponsor of Orion. He attended every leadership update. He gave every external presentation about it. He had written a post on the firm's internal blog about his vision for the platform's AI capabilities. I had built those capabilities. Mr. Dade had joined the firm 2 years before I did, coming from a product strategy background rather than an engineering one. He was 43, articulate at the executive level, and had been promoted to head of ML engineering in a decision that had surprised several people on the team, including the 2 engineers who had been more obvious candidates. He was not a bad person. I want to be precise about that because imprecision here makes the rest of the story harder to understand. He was not malicious. He was opportunistic in the specific way that people become when they have found a configuration that benefits them and never fully interrogate whether the configuration is fair. He knew how to translate technical work into business language. That was a real skill, and it had real value. What he had done over 2 years was position himself as the translator between the engineering team and senior leadership in a way that made the translation look like the work rather than the thing the translation was describing. When I shipped the data pipeline rebuild, he wrote the internal announcement framing it as a major infrastructure investment led by the ML team under his direction. When the anomaly detection system went into beta, he presented it to the product leadership team in a 30-minute session I had not been invited to. When Orion shipped its first milestone, he gave a keynote at the firm's internal tech conference. I was in the audience. I had built the system he was describing. I was in the audience. I had known by the end of my second year that this was the configuration. I had spent 8 months deciding what to do about it. I made the decision in February. Not to confront him, not to escalate, Both of those paths led to the same place, a conversation where I had feelings and he had context, and nothing structurally changed. I decided to leave. But I decided to leave on my timeline in a way that gave me maximum leverage with documentation in place and an offer in hand. Not out of anger, out of strategy. Because I understood clearly that the most powerful position I could be in was not the position of someone who had been wronged. It was the position of someone who had options. I reached out to Vertex Systems through a professional contact in January. They had been building an ML infrastructure team for 18 months and had been publicly discussing the technical problems I had spent 3 years becoming expert at. My contact made an introduction. I had a first conversation in late January. By February, I was in the formal interview process. By March, I had completed 5 rounds, a technical screen, 2 system design sessions, a research presentation, and a leadership conversation with Vertex's chief technology officer. I had done every interview outside working hours. Every preparation session was at home, in the evenings, with my phone on silent. Nobody at my firm knew. I had also, in parallel, been quietly documenting my contributions to Orion, specifications, commit histories, design documents, architecture decisions. Everything that showed, with precision, what I had actually built, and when. The review meeting had been on the calendar for 3 weeks. I had been ready for it for longer than that. The Orion documentation had taken 6 weeks to compile. I was not building it for any immediate purpose. Or rather, I was building it the way I built any good system. Not for the moment you need it, but for the moment you might. A technical specification is not useful when the problem is already solved. It is useful when something breaks, and everyone has forgotten how it was built. I had a feeling that something was going to break. The commit history alone spanned 14 months and over 2,000 individual changes. I pulled every design document I had authored or co-authored. I compiled the architecture decision records, the internal write-ups engineers do when they make a significant technical choice, explaining the options considered and the reasoning for the direction taken. I had written 41 of them on Orion alone. I had a colleague named Dev who had worked with me on the anomaly detection system. He was thorough, methodical, and had the specific quality of engineers who don't embellish. When Dev described what someone had built, it was accurate to the exact level of detail, and no further. I didn't tell Dev what I was building. I just asked him, one afternoon in March, whether he remembered who had designed the core architecture for the anomaly detection system. He looked at me like I had asked whether water was wet.
You did, he said.
All of it. I implemented 3 of the modules. You designed the whole thing.
Why?
Just checking something, I said. He gave me a look that lasted slightly longer than the question warranted. But he didn't ask anything else. Ms. Holt from Vertex had called me 3 days before the review to say they were ready to move forward and would be calling on Thursday afternoon with formal offer details. I had said, Thursday afternoon works well. I had not mentioned that I had a performance review Thursday afternoon. I had not mentioned it because I had thought about the timing carefully and concluded that the sequence was not a coincidence, but an alignment. 2 things converging on the same afternoon. I had not engineered the timing. I had simply not moved either thing to avoid the collision.
I want to be honest about that.
I knew the call was coming. I knew the review was coming. I placed my phone face up on the table when I sat down in Mr. Dade's office. I was not planning what happened next, but I was not unaware that it might. I had placed the phone face up on the table. I had not told anyone at the firm that a call was coming. I want to be precise about my intentions because the story is better understood accurately than dramatically. I had not engineered a confrontation. I had cleared space for the truth to be present in the room if the right conditions arose. Those are different things. The night before the review, I sat in my apartment for a long time after dinner without turning anything on. No music, no television. Just the particular quiet of an evening before something significant that you have prepared for as thoroughly as you know how. I had worked very hard for 3 years. I had built things that were real and substantial and worth more than what my title and compensation reflected. I had watched those things described in rooms I was not invited into by a person who had not built them, in language that was often mine translated through a different mouth.
I did not feel sorry for myself about that.
I felt ready to be finished with the arrangement. I had been ready since February. Tomorrow would confirm it. Dev found me at the coffee machine at 8:30 Thursday morning. He did not do small talk before the point, which was one of the things I valued about him. Review today, he said. Yes, I said. He poured his coffee. He was quiet for a moment. I've been here a year longer than you, he said. I've seen 2 annual cycles. I want to tell you something, and you can do whatever you want with it. I looked at him. What you've built on this team, the pipeline rebuild, the anomaly system, Orion, that's not interchangeable work. That's not talent you find on a job board. He held his cup. If Dade doesn't reflect that today, the problem is with his understanding of what he has, not with what you've done. I looked at him for a moment. Thank you, I said. I also want to say, he said, that I filled out the peer review section of your evaluation this morning. Specifically. He paused. I named the work, the data pipeline, the anomaly system, Orion. I named you as the architect on every piece of it I was part of. I put timestamps where I had them. I hadn't asked him to do any of that. He had done it before we spoke, before he even knew what I was planning to do in that review room. I thought about that on the walk back to my desk. Dev had always known what was true. He had been in the rooms where the work happened. He had seen whose hands were on it. He had never embellished, but he had also, for a long time, not been asked. The peer review form had asked. He had answered with the precision he brought to everything. The people who build with you see more than you think. They just need the right form to say it. Mr. Dade began the review at 2:00. He had printed a 1-page summary that he placed between us on the table. I had seen the format before: performance rating, key observations, areas for development. He had rated me meets expectations, which was the 3rd tier of 5. I read it while he was still talking. The summary described my work on Orion as strong technical contribution to a complex cross-functional initiative. It described my anomaly detection system as a significant component of the enterprise tier development. It described my data pipeline rebuild as infrastructure maintenance. Infrastructure maintenance. 9 months of work. 61% latency reduction. $400,000 in annual cost savings. Infrastructure maintenance. I set the paper down. I felt something move through me that I did not let reach my face. Not anger, something quieter and more durable than that. The feeling of reading a document that describes a version of your work that has been stripped of everything that made it significant. Infrastructure maintenance. I had spent 9 months on that rebuild. I had studied the failure modes of the old pipeline for 6 weeks before I wrote a single line of new code. I had written a 40-page technical specification that had been circulated internally as a reference document for other teams. Infrastructure maintenance. I pressed the feeling down. There would be a time for it. This was not that time. Mr. Dade was talking about development areas now. Executive presence. Strategic visibility. The importance of being able to communicate the business value of technical decisions to non-technical leadership. I noted the irony of that last point without letting it show on my face. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I listened. I had known, since the invite arrived with the blocked hour, roughly what shape this conversation was going to take. What I had not known was the specific wording. Now I had it. Infrastructure maintenance. I filed it in the part of my mind that keeps receipts. Mr. Dade was building towards something. I gave him the room to arrive. He said it at the 22-minute mark. He had been working up to it. I could feel the architecture of the conversation, the way he had been laying down qualifications and softeners before the central point. He was not a cruel man. He was a careful one, and the difference between cruelty and carefulness is sometimes just the quality of the rehearsal. Imani, he said, I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve that. He paused in the way people pause when they are trying to look like they are choosing their words in the moment rather than reciting them. The ML market has changed significantly in the last 18 months. The accessibility of talent, the tools available, what was a scarce skill set 3 years ago, is more commoditized now. What you do here is genuinely good work, but I want you to understand the landscape. He looked at me. The firm has more access to talent at your level than it had when you joined. What you do here is something we could source competitively. He let that land. I thought about 9 months in the data pipeline. The 41 architecture decision records. the anomaly detection system that had become an enterprise product. 14 months on Orion. 2,000 commits. I thought about the peer review Dev had submitted that morning. I thought about Ms. Holt's voice on the phone 3 days ago. We're ready to move forward. I looked at Mr. Dade for a long moment. Then I nodded. My phone buzzed on the table between us. The screen showed Ms. Holt, Vertex Systems. I looked at the name for 1 second. Then I looked at Mr. Dade. Excuse me one moment, I said. I need to take this. I saw something move across his face, a brief flicker of uncertainty. This was his meeting. This was his agenda. People did not take calls during their annual performance reviews. I picked up the phone. Ms. Holt, I said. Imani. Her voice was warm and precise. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I glanced at Mr. Dade. It's fine, I said. Please go ahead. We're calling to formally extend an offer, she said. Principal Machine Learning Engineer. Infrastructure. Reporting directly to the CTO. The total compensation package is $380,000 annually, plus equity that vests over 4 years with a 1-year cliff. We'd like you to start the 1st of June if that works. I had prepared for this number. I had expected something in this range based on the Vertex compensation structures I had researched. I had still not fully absorbed what it would feel like to hear it said out loud. I sat with it for one breath. Thank you, I said. I'll review the formal offer letter and get back to you by Monday. Perfect, she said. We're excited, Imani. The CTO specifically wanted me to tell you that your system design round was the strongest we've seen in this hiring cycle. I appreciate that, I said. I'll be in touch. I put the phone down. I looked at Mr. Dade. The room held a specific quality of silence. Mr. Dade was intelligent enough to understand what had just happened. The name on the phone had been visible from where he sat. Vertex was audible. I had not muffled the name. The number had been spoken clearly because I had not thought to lower my voice, and also, if I am being honest, because I had not wanted to. He said, "Was that a job offer?" I said. "Yes." A pause. "From Vertex Systems," I said. Principal ML Engineer. Infrastructure. Reporting to the CTO. Total compensation $380,000 plus equity. I said it without emphasis. The way you state facts that are simply facts. Something in his face moved that I could not name precisely. Not embarrassment, something older than that. The specific expression of a person who has said a thing and is now sitting next to its exact refutation. I've been in their process since January, I said. 5 rounds. The final conversation was with their CTO last week. He built this role around my infrastructure architecture work, the kind of work you just described as something the firm could source competitively. The paper on the table still said infrastructure maintenance. We both looked at it. Imani, he started. I don't need a response right now, I said. I just wanted you to have the full picture before I made my decision. I stood up. I'll let you know by end of week, I said. I walked out of his office and closed the door behind me with no more force than it required to latch. Dev was at my desk when I got back. He had not been invited. He had been watching the time and had found a reason to be near my desk when the review ended. This was not something he ever would have done in a professional context before. He was too precise about boundaries, and the fact that he was there told me he had been more worried than he had shown at the coffee machine. He looked at my face. How did it go? He said. I sat down. He said I was replaceable, I said. Dev's expression didn't change. He had the face of someone who had heard exactly what he expected to hear. And then, I said, Vertex called. A pause. While you were still in there? While I was still in there. He sat very still for a moment. Then, slowly, a smile appeared on Dev's face that I had never seen on him before. Not a happy smile, exactly. The specific expression of someone who has watched a very precise thing happen and is processing the accuracy of it. What did he say? Dev asked. After the call. Not much, I said. He started to. I told him I'd let him know my decision by end of week. Dev looked at me for a long moment. What are you going to do? He said. I thought about 3 years of work, about the paper on the table that said infrastructure maintenance, about $380,000, and a CTO who had called my system design the strongest in the hiring cycle. I already know what I'm going to do, I said. The hardest part was a conversation from 8 months earlier. My mother had come to visit in August. She had driven up from Houston, which she did twice a year, and we had spent a Saturday doing the slow, comfortable things, the farmer's market, lunch, a walk around the lake near my apartment. In the afternoon, sitting on the couch, she had asked about work. I had told her it was going well. I had described Orion the way I always described it to her, in terms of what it did rather than how it was built, because my mother was not a technical person, and I had learned years ago that the correct translation was the functional one. She had nodded and asked good questions. Then she said, "Are you happy there?" "Not the work. Are you happy?" I had held that question for a moment. "I'm proud of the work," I said. She had looked at me with the particular expression she wore when she understood something I hadn't said. "That's not the same thing," she said. I had not argued with that. "I think I'm building towards something," I said. "I don't know yet what the right moment is." She had nodded slowly. "You'll know it," she said. "You always know when a thing is ready. That's what you do for a living." I had thought about that a lot over the following months. The review. The vertex process. The phone face up on the table. She was right. I knew when a thing was ready. Thursday afternoon at 2:23, I had known. I called my mother from my car at 5:45. I told her everything. The review, the call, the moment Mr. Dade's voice went quiet after he heard the number. I told her about Dev waiting at my desk, about the paper on the table that said infrastructure maintenance. She was quiet through most of it. When I finished, she said, "He said you were replaceable." "Yes." And then the phone rang. "Yes." She was quiet for another moment. "Baby," she said, "I want you to hear me carefully. I'm listening." "That man did you a favor," she said. "Not the kind he intended. A real one. If he had given you the review you deserved, if he had seen what you built and said it out loud, you might have stayed another year. 2. Built more things. Waited longer. Kept telling yourself the recognition was coming." She paused. Instead, he said what he actually believed. And the phone rang at exactly the right moment to show both of you exactly how wrong he was. She paused again. "You put the phone on the table," she said. "I did." "Did you know it was going to ring?" "I knew it might." She was quiet for a moment. "That's the thing about being ready," she said. "You don't need to know when. You just need to make sure you're prepared when it does." I sat in my car for a long time after we hung up. I thought about systems that fail gracefully. The best ones do not crash silently. They reveal, in the failure, exactly what the flaw was and where it lived. Mr. Dade's review had been a failure of that kind. It had revealed something precise about his understanding of my work, and the call had revealed something precise about how the market understood it. Both revelations had happened in the same room at the same time. I had not planned that, but I had been ready for it. I sent him a message at 7 o'clock that evening. Not about the offer. Not about the review. About a meeting request. "Can we find 30 minutes tomorrow? I'd like to continue our conversation." He responded at 7:22. "Of course." 8:30. I confirmed. That evening I read through the formal offer letter that had arrived at 6. Principal ML Engineer, Infrastructure. $380,000 total compensation. Equity vesting over 4 years. Start date June 1st. A note from the CTO. "We built this role with your profile in mind. The infrastructure architecture work you've done is exactly the problem we're trying to solve at scale." I read it twice. Then I set it aside and opened a different document. I had been working on it in pieces for several weeks, a precise, chronological account of my technical contributions to the firm over 3 years. The data pipeline rebuild, 9 months, 61% latency reduction, $400,000 in annual cost savings. The anomaly detection system, 11 weeks from blank document to beta, now the foundation of the enterprise tier. Orion, 14 months, 41 architecture decision records, the ML components of the firm's largest platform initiative. Specific dates. Specific metrics. My name on every decision. Not for the meeting with Mr. Dade. That meeting was going to go the way it was going to go regardless. For the record. Because the record was the thing that outlasted feelings. The record was the thing that a CEO could pull when he wanted to understand the gap between what had been built and what had been presented. The record was the thing that Dev's 6 pages would attach to. The record was the thing I would leave behind when I left. I finished it at 10:30 and saved a copy to 3 separate locations. Then I closed the laptop and slept better than I had in months. The 8:30 meeting was quiet. Mr. Dade sat across from me with his hands on the table. He had none of the settled authority he usually carried into rooms. He looked like what he was, a person who had said something the day before and was now sitting with the consequences of having said it in front of the evidence that refuted it. I told him I was accepting the Vertex offer. He said, "Imani, I want to make the case for you to stay." I looked at him. "I think there's a path." "Marcus," I said. His first name. "What you said yesterday was accurate from your perspective. You believe I'm replaceable. You have acted on that belief for 3 years in the way you've represented my work upward, the way you've structured my access to leadership, the way you described the data pipeline rebuild as infrastructure maintenance." I paused. "I'm not interested in arguing about whether your assessment was correct. I'm telling you it informed a decision I had already been making for several months." He was quiet. "Vertex disagrees with your assessment," I said. "Their CTO has told me directly that the architecture work I've been doing here is exactly what they need at scale. They've structured a role around my specific contribution." I looked at him steadily. "The market has spoken. Just not in the direction you described." He said nothing for a long time. Then, "Is there anything I can do to address what I said yesterday?" "No," I said. "But I appreciate you asking." I thanked him for 3 years and walked out. I gave 4 weeks' notice. There was a counteroffer from HR in my second week. I declined it without negotiation. The issue had never been the number. The number was a symptom. The configuration was the disease, and the configuration was not something a compensation adjustment could fix. What I had not anticipated was the rest. Mr. Baxter, the CEO, asked to meet with me during my second week. He had pulled the Orion engineering records, the commit histories, the design documents, the 41 architecture decision records. He told me that what those records showed and what the leadership presentations had described were not the same picture. He asked if I would have a documented conversation with HR before I left. I said yes. I brought the documentation I had compiled over the previous 3 years. I was precise and sequential. The pipeline rebuild, the anomaly system, Orion. Dates, metrics, my name on every decision. It was, I realized afterward, a conversation I could not have had 18 months earlier. Not because the evidence hadn't existed. It had existed since the first month I built anything significant. But evidence only becomes actionable when someone in a position to act on it is ready to look at it. The Vertex offer had made Mr. Baxter ready. Sometimes the record needs an external validator before the room will read it. Sometimes you have to put your phone face up on the table and wait for the call that makes the evidence undeniable. I had been waiting for that call since February. On Thursday, at 2:23, it had come. Dev came to my desk 3 days before my last day. He sat down and placed a printed document on the table. "I submitted a formal account to HR last week," he said, "about the anomaly detection project and Orion. What I built, what you built, and how the external presentations described both." I looked at him. "I also attached the peer review I submitted for your annual evaluation," he said, "in case anyone needed to compare what I wrote with what ended up in your summary." I picked up the document. It was 6 pages. Specific, technical, and accurate in the precise way that only someone who had actually worked alongside the build could be. "Dev," I said. "I should have done it sooner," he said. "I knew what was happening. I just kept telling myself it wasn't my place." He was quiet for a moment. "Your leaving made it clear that it was." I thanked him. He nodded once, the way he did when something had been settled to his satisfaction, and went back to his desk. I sat with the 6 pages for a long time. They were everything I hadn't asked for, and everything that mattered. Not because I needed them to prove something to myself. I already knew what I had built. but because the record that I had been building in my documentation, the metrics, the commits, the architecture decisions was my account of my own work. Dev's 6 pages were someone else's account. A peer account from someone who had worked alongside the build and could describe it the way only a participant could, from the inside. That combination, the primary source and the corroborating witness, was, I understood, the kind of record that stood up under pressure. I filed Dev's pages alongside my own documentation. I thought about the people who build things alongside you and see more than you think. They usually do see it. They just need a moment where saying it makes sense. Sometimes that moment is a peer review form. Sometimes it is 3 days before someone's last day. Sometimes it is both. My last day was a Friday. I had cleared my desk gradually across the final week, so there was no box to carry. Just a bag with my personal hard drive and a small plant I had kept on the windowsill for 2 years that I was taking to the new apartment. Mr. Baxter came to find me at 4:15. He stood in my doorway, a mirror of a moment I had watched happen to other people in other contexts, except this time the person in the frame had the expression of genuine regret rather than managed notification. "I want to say something before you go," he said.
Of course, I said.
"What the records show, what you built here, that's not infrastructure maintenance." He said it without flourish, just the words. "I'm sorry that the way this firm represented your work didn't match the reality of what you did. That's a failure of leadership, and it's on us." I looked at him. "I know," I said. "I appreciate you saying it. I meant both things. Vertex is getting something significant," he said. "I know that too," I said. He smiled briefly, the specific smile of someone who recognizes they have lost something they should have valued differently and has made peace with the accuracy of that recognition. I thought about saying something else. Something about the 3 years. About the pipeline rebuild and the anomaly detection system and Orion. About the 41 architecture decisions and the $400,000 in annual cost savings described as infrastructure maintenance. I didn't. The record said all of it, more precisely than I could, and without the weight of someone who needed to be believed. I picked up my bag and my plant and walked out. Mr. Dade's role was restructured 6 weeks after I left. Dev sent me a message. They split the role. Engineering leadership separate from external communications. Thought you'd want to know. The separation made structural sense. The skills required to translate technical work for business audiences and the skills required to lead a technical team are not the same skills. Treating them as one skill, held by one person, had produced polished translation and wrong attribution. That configuration was now gone. Dev messaged again 2 days later. "Newham lead starts Monday." She came from Vertex, actually. Small world. I smiled at that in a way I couldn't fully explain. I sent him back 3 words. "Keep the records." He replied immediately. "Already am." The call had been the visible moment. The number. The silence in the review room. The phone rang at the right time, and the room rearranged itself. But the rearrangement was permanent because of what the moment sat on top of. The documentation I had built across 3 years. The commit histories. The 41 architecture decisions. Dev's 6 pages, submitted the morning of my review. The 2-hour HR conversation where I brought a folder and named everything with precision. Those things were what changed the structure. The call opened the door. The records were what walked through it. I had been building both for 3 years without fully understanding that they were the same project. The call was the moment. The records were the work the moment was made of. Now I knew the difference. And I kept it. I started at Vertex on June 2nd. The first week was orientation, but not the kind where you sit in rooms and absorb information about the company culture. Vertex's onboarding for infrastructure roles was hands-on. By day 3, I was in the architecture review for a system I would be responsible for rebuilding over the following 6 months. The problem was harder than anything I had worked on before. Not harder in complexity, harder in scale. The kind of problem that required the specific combination of skills I had spent 3 years developing in a context that had been, in its way, perfect preparation.
I thought about that.
About the data pipeline I had rebuilt at 29 with insufficient tooling and a team that didn't fully understand what I was doing. About the anomaly detection system built in 11 weeks because the product team needed it and nobody else was going to build it. About Orion, 14 months of the most difficult technical work I had done, built under a configuration that was wrong in ways I hadn't fully named at the time. All of it had prepared me for the scale of what I was now being asked to do. The CTO stopped by my desk at the end of week 2. He asked how I was settling in. I feel like I've been building toward this problem for 3 years, I said. He nodded slowly. That's why we wanted you, he said.
He moved on.
I turned back to the architecture review and kept working. The Vertex role came with a title I had not held before, Principal. It meant something specific in that context, not just seniority, but ownership. I owned the infrastructure ML architecture. I made the decisions. I wrote the design documents under my name and presented them to the engineering leadership team myself. I did not handwork to someone else to translate. I translated it. I realized in my 3rd week, the first time in my career, that the configuration matched the contribution. I had a one-on-one with the CTO every 2 weeks. In the second one, he asked me what I had found most different about working here. I thought about it honestly. Attribution, I said.
He looked at me.
At my previous firm, the work and the recognition for the work existed in separate places, held by separate people. What you built and what got said about it in the rooms that mattered were not the same thing. I paused. Here they seemed to be the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. That's not accidental, he said. We've watched it go wrong at other companies. The pattern is predictable. When the translation layer and the build layer separate, the translation layer accrues status, and the build layer accrues frustration. Eventually the builders leave. Then the quality leaves. Then you're left with a very well-presented product that no one can actually improve. He paused. We'd rather just say who built what. I thought about the paper on Mr. Dade's table. Infrastructure, maintenance. That approach has significant value, I said. More than it looks like from the inside of a healthy culture. He nodded slowly. I suspect you know that better than most people sitting in this office, he said. He was right. I filed that conversation in the same place I filed things I intended to act on. My mother came to visit in July. She drove up from Houston the way she always did, and we spent a Saturday doing the slow things, a different market, a different lake, the same quality of comfortable quiet. In the afternoon, she asked about the new job. I told her about the problem I was working on. I told her about the CTO and the 2-week one-on-ones. I told her about the architecture review on day 3 and the way the team had made room for me to lead before I had asked for that room. She listened the way she listened, with her whole attention, without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Are you happy? Not are you proud of the work?"
Happy.
I thought about it the way she had taught me to think about things. Honestly, without rushing to the comfortable answer. Yes, I said. The work is hard in the right ways. The people see what I'm doing. I feel like I'm where the work I've built is pointing. She nodded slowly. That's what I wanted to hear, she said. After lunch, on the walk around the lake, she said, I think about that Thursday sometimes.
The review.
The phone. I think about it too, I said. You knew it was coming, she said. The call. You put your phone on the table. I did. Did you plan what happened? I thought about it honestly. I built toward a position where whatever happened was manageable, I said. I didn't plan the moment. I just made sure I was ready for it. She walked beside me for a while without speaking. That's the whole thing, isn't it? She said.
It was.
Dev and I have a standing call every few weeks. He is still at the firm. He was promoted 3 months after I left, not to a management role but to a staff engineer designation, which is the individual contributor track and which, in his case, was exactly correct. He builds things. He names them accurately. He is now in a firm that, following the restructuring, has a cleaner configuration between who builds and who presents. On our last call, he asked me something I had not expected. Do you ever think about what would have happened if the call hadn't come on Thursday? He said. If Vertex had called Friday instead? I thought about it honestly. I would have resigned anyway, I said. The offer was coming. The decision had been made in February when I started the interview process. All that changed on Thursday was the sequence. The review and the call happened in the same room at the same time, which meant he was present for both sides of the same sentence. Dev considered that. What do you think he understood in that moment? He asked. I had thought about this more than I expected to. I think he understood that he had been wrong about a specific thing, I said. That what he described as a commodity was something someone else had been willing to pay significantly more for. Whether he understood why he had been wrong, whether he understood the difference between skills and judgment, between what's on a resume and what's in the work, I don't know. That's a harder thing to see in a single moment. Do you feel sorry for him? Dev asked. I thought about it carefully. I feel clear, I said. He was wrong about my value. I have external evidence that he was wrong. I'm doing the work I was built to do, in a place that can see it. I paused. Clear is better than sorry.
Dev said that was about right.
I think about what replaceable means. When Mr. Dade said it, he meant it as a market observation, that the skills I had were available, that the pool of talent had deepened, that what I brought to the firm could be sourced elsewhere. He believed that was true. He was wrong, but he believed it. What he missed was the difference between skills and judgment. You can hire skills. The ML market does have more accessible talent than it did 3 years ago.
He was not entirely wrong about that.
What you cannot source is the specific judgment that comes from 9 months rebuilding one pipeline and understanding exactly why the previous one failed. The judgment that comes from building an anomaly detection system in 11 weeks because you understood the problem deeply enough to move fast. The judgment that comes from 14 months on Orion, making 41 architecture decisions under a configuration that was wrong and still shipping something that worked. That judgment is not listed on a resume. It does not appear in a performance rating. It does not show up in a summary that says strong technical contribution to a complex cross-functional initiative. It shows up in the work. And it shows up in the moment when a room full of engineers at one of the most technically rigorous companies in the country asks you to come and solve their hardest problem, and their CTO writes you a note saying your design round was the strongest they had seen. Mr. Dade said I was replaceable. The call came at exactly the right moment. And the call came because I had spent 3 years building something that made it inevitable. Some people will look at what you've built and see a cost center. Some will look at the same thing and see exactly what they've been looking for. The difference isn't the work. It's whose table you put your phone on. What are you building right now that the wrong room doesn't know the value of yet?